The story unfolding now could reshape not only the course of the war in Ukraine, but the entire geopolitical landscape. A series of unexpected moves, contradictory statements, and behind-the-scenes negotiations have led to a situation that seems almost too complex to untangle, yet too important to ignore. Over the past several days, the world's attention has quietly shifted to a set of documents circulating between Kyiv, Washington, and European capitals. A plan, 20 points long, that some are already calling the most realistic blueprint for peace. But as with everything in this war, nothing is as simple as it looks. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky has spoken about this plan with a confidence that suggests something significant is underway. At the same time, the Kremlin's reaction has been both restrained and cryptic. While Russian state media remain silent, sources close to the Russian government have begun hinting that Moscow is analyzing the proposal. Western diplomats describe the mood as cautiously hopeful, while Ukrainian analysts warn that what appears to be progress might instead conceal a new trap. The United States, in turn, seems determined to present itself as the broker of an ending to Europe's most destructive war since 1945. But what is really happening behind the scenes? Why has Washington suddenly revived its diplomatic efforts, even engaging unlikely intermediaries such as Belarus's Alexander Lukashenko? And why are Russian military bloggers, who for months parroted the Kremlin's triumphalism, now openly admitting defeats they once denied? Something profound is shifting, and the signals are coming from every direction, from the front lines in Kupiansk and Ivanivka to the oil terminals burning in Taman and the negotiation rooms in Brussels. Tonight, we bring you a full investigation, the most detailed yet, into how these events intertwine. We will uncover the hidden mechanisms behind Zelensky's 20-point peace plan, the United States' surprising outreach to Minsk, and the silent panic spreading through Moscow's military command after weeks of battlefield losses. But before we reveal the heart of this story, let's start by painting the atmosphere that now envelops Eastern Europe. For weeks, the war had seemed frozen in repetition. Artillery exchanges, drone strikes, slow advances, and endless reports of casualties. Yet within that monotony, something began to change. Ukrainian attacks became more precise, more daring, reaching deeper into Russian-occupied territory. The footage of burning fuel tanks in the port of Taman, of explosions in Timryuk and Orenburg, started circulating online faster than Russian censors could delete it. The question that emerged was simple but frightening for Moscow. How were these drones operating so effectively, even in areas where satellite internet supposedly did not work? Analysts soon began suspecting new technologies, new tactics, perhaps even external assistance. At the same time, another drama was unfolding. This time, political. Zelensky appeared in public to outline what he called a realistic basis for ending the war. 20 points, he said, carefully agreed upon with Washington and Europe. Though he spoke calmly, even modestly, the subtext was explosive. Western diplomats who had seen early drafts described the document as a complete framework. Sovereignty guarantees, demilitarized zones, economic recovery funds, and a mechanism for the supervision of ceasefire compliance led by none other than former U.S. President Donald Trump. No official in Moscow dared comment publicly, but according to Bloomberg, a senior source close to the Kremlin described the plan as typical of Ukrainian thinking, ambitious but lacking realism. Yet, privately, Russian officials admitted they were studying it. The reason? Unlike previous proposals, this one had Washington's direct imprint and Europe's full endorsement. Meanwhile, in Washington, a parallel conversation was taking shape, one that few expected. The Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. had quietly reopened a diplomatic channel with Belarus. The idea, according to multiple officials, was to demonstrate to Putin what he could gain by ending the war. To many, that sounded naive. Yet, in the logic of Washington's strategists, it made sense. If the Kremlin could see Lukashenko rewarded for limited cooperation, Perhaps it would tempt Moscow to follow a similar path. The U.S. has already relaxed some sanctions on Belarusian fertilizer producers, and even allowed American companies to supply spare parts to Belavia, the state airline. The symbolism is powerful. A year ago, Lukashenko was an international pariah. Now he finds himself courted, not by Moscow, but by Washington. Behind closed doors, he reportedly jokes about it, offering advice to American envoys on how to manage Putin. Whether these gestures lead anywhere remains to be seen, but they fit a pattern. The United States is trying to open as many channels as possible before the next decisive moment arrives. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, that decisive moment might already be here. Russian Z-bloggers, once fiercely loyal to the Kremlin's narrative, have begun publicly contradicting official reports. Channels like Rybar and Two Majors admit that Kupiansk, long claimed by Moscow to be under full control, has effectively fallen. Satellite maps confirm Ukrainian forces now dominate most of the city, leaving Russian troops confined to scattered northern sectors. Even Rybar, a channel connected to Russia's defense ministry, now describes the situation as worse than critical. For many, this acknowledgement marks a turning point. It's the first time since the invasion began that the Z community has united in defiance of Moscow's propaganda line. And that, in turn, suggests that even inside Russia, the illusion of unstoppable progress is cracking. All of this builds a sense of anticipation, a quiet awareness that something big is coming. In the next part of this report, we will reveal the full contents of Zelensky's 20-point plan, explore how Washington and Brussels have shaped it, and analyze what exactly Moscow fears most about it. But before we dive into the details, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because what you are about to hear might change how you understand this war entirely. The veil of secrecy surrounding President Zelensky's 20-point peace proposal has finally started to lift, revealing a document that is far more complex, ambitious, and politically charged than anyone initially imagined. It is not just a blueprint for ending the war, but a roadmap for reshaping the security architecture of Eastern Europe itself. Every line of it carries the weight of 4 years of bloodshed, sanctions, and exhaustion, yet also the spark of something that feels almost unimaginable now: the possibility of peace. The first points of the plan are the foundation stones, an explicit confirmation of Ukraine's sovereignty within its internationally recognized borders, and a non-aggression treaty between Kyiv and Moscow, with international monitoring along the contact line. These two opening clauses might seem symbolic, but in them lies the essence of the entire proposal. For the first time since 2014, Ukraine is demanding not just recognition, but the codification of its independence in a legally binding treaty guaranteed by the world's major powers. To ensure this, the document calls for the creation of a joint monitoring mission drawn from neutral states, with American and European participation. The third and fourth points define Ukraine's future military posture. The country would maintain an army of 800,000 personnel in peacetime, a number both symbolic and strategic, signaling readiness while preserving stability. The fifth point mirrors NATO's Article 5. If Russia were to invade again, the United States, NATO, and the European Union would respond with immediate military support and the full reinstatement of sanctions. The sixth clause requires Moscow to embed a formal policy of non-aggression toward Ukraine and Europe into its national legislation, something unprecedented in modern Russian politics. Then come the economic guarantees. The seventh and eighth points set a clear timeline for Ukraine's accession to the European Union and outline an international investment pact named the Global Recovery and Development Package. Its aim? To mobilize up to $800 billion for reconstruction, funded by Western allies, frozen Russian assets, and private investors. The ninth and 10th points deal with trade, accelerating negotiations on a free trade agreement between Ukraine and the United States, designed to anchor Ukraine's economy firmly in the Western orbit. From the 11th point onward, the plan shifts from political mechanics to symbolism. Ukraine reaffirms its non-nuclear status, and a trilateral management framework for its nuclear facilities is proposed, with American oversight. While this idea raised eyebrows even among allies, it reflects Washington's desire to secure absolute transparency over nuclear safety in the region. The 12th through 14th points are the most controversial. They concern territory, the central question of the war. Under the proposed formula, Russia would withdraw from Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions, while the front line in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson would be frozen where it stands. The only exception: any adjustment to these boundaries would require a referendum supervised by the United Nations. To Russia, this clause is intolerable. Kremlin insiders call it a disguised capitulation, while Ukrainian analysts see it as a pragmatic compromise that saves lives and creates a legal framework for eventual restoration of full sovereignty. The 15th and 16th points seek to prevent future escalation. Both sides pledge not to alter the terms of the agreement by force, and Russia commits to allowing Ukraine unrestricted commercial access to the Dnipro River and the Black Sea, with the Kinburn Spit demilitarized under international supervision. Then comes the humanitarian dimension. Points 17 through 20 speak to the war's deepest scars: the prisoners, the displaced, the children. The plan calls for a full exchange of all detainees, the return of civilians and minors, and immediate elections in Ukraine after the treaty's signing. Finally, the agreement would become legally binding, enforced by a newly formed peace council chaired by Donald Trump. The last clause declares that once all parties sign, a total ceasefire will come into effect without delay. It is an extraordinary document, detailed, emotional, and yet fragile. In Washington, officials whisper that this might be the last serious attempt before a new escalation begins. European diplomats describe the plan as too acceptable for Ukraine, too humiliating for Moscow. Even so, in corridors from Berlin to Brussels, there is cautious optimism that if Russia feels cornered economically, it may at least start negotiating. The Kremlin, however, continues to play its familiar game of ambiguity. Anonymous sources quoted by Bloomberg claim Moscow is analyzing the plan as a potential framework, but others insist it's merely a tactic to buy time. They complain that it lacks guarantees against NATO's further expansion and offers no clarity on sanctions relief or the fate of hundreds of billions in frozen Russian state assets. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Pranata Whitaker, told Fox News that about 4 documents are now on the table: the 20-point plan, a multilateral security guarantee, and a post-war economic roadmap. "We are closer to an agreement than ever before," she said, "but the ball is in Russia's court." The words are diplomatic, but their meaning is clear. Washington expects Moscow to answer, and soon. But while diplomats trade drafts and rhetoric, the war continues with undiminished ferocity. Ukrainian strikes are becoming increasingly audacious. The fire that tore through the oil tanks in the port of Timryuk is just the latest in a string of operations that have left Russia's logistics networks in disarray. Explosions at the Taman terminal and in Crimea's Mirne settlement destroyed facilities used to maintain Russian naval drones. Analysts studying drone footage noted something remarkable. Many of these strikes appear to have been manually guided in real time, suggesting an advanced control link extending hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory. Military experts speculate about how Ukraine is maintaining this link, given that Starlink does not officially operate within Russia. The answer might lie in improvisation, a chain of signal relays using maritime terminals in the Azov Sea. If so, this represents a leap in Ukrainian ingenuity, turning geography itself into a weapon. The Russian military, for its part, has failed to counter these tactics effectively. Its electronic warfare systems are scattered and outdated, leaving vital infrastructure exposed. Beyond the battlefield, the economic war continues as well. India's Reliance Industries, the country's largest private oil refiner, has quietly resumed buying Russian crude after a short pause caused by U.S. sanctions. Shipments now reach its Jamnagar refinery aboard Aframax tankers chartered through a Russian intermediary, Rus Export. Officials in New Delhi downplay the move, calling it a commercial decision, but Western observers fear it undermines the sanctions regime. The reality is that without secondary enforcement, such breaches are inevitable, and Washington knows it. At the same time, Ukraine's energy system remains under constant assault. Russian missile and drone attacks have targeted power stations from Sumy to Kharkiv, leaving millions without electricity just days before Christmas. The Ministry of Energy reports that repairs are ongoing around the clock, yet the scale of the damage is immense. President Zelensky has accused Russia of coordinating these strikes using imagery from Chinese satellites, claiming Kyiv has found a clear correlation between satellite activity and missile launches. He has promised to raise the issue with Western partners, warning that any cooperation between Chinese companies and the Russian military undermines global stability. On the human front, the toll is staggering. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, civilian deaths in Ukraine have risen by 70% in 2025 compared to 2 years earlier. In November alone, 226 civilians were killed and nearly 1,000 wounded. These are only confirmed cases. The real numbers, officials admit, are far higher. The ombudsman, Dmytro Lubinets, says many casualties go unrecorded in occupied territories or zones of active combat. And yet, amid this devastation, something has shifted in the psychology of the war. For the first time, Russian soldiers are no longer arriving faster than they are dying. Western intelligence estimates confirm that the Russian army's overall manpower growth has nearly stalled. In early 2025, Moscow's forces in Ukraine were growing by over 10,000 men a month. Now, that number is closer to 3,000. The reason is not a decrease in recruitment, but the sheer volume of losses. As a result, Russia's war machine is reaching its saturation point, the moment when new conscripts can no longer replace the dead. Brigadier General Andrei Beletsky, commander of Ukraine's Third Army Corps, has said that this is the beginning of the decline of Russia's offensive capability. If the pattern continues, Russia will soon struggle to maintain its current front lines, let alone advance. The plan of Madyar, he added, referring to the Ukrainian strategist who proposed focusing on attrition, is working. The logic is brutal but effective. To end the war, Ukraine must ensure Russia loses soldiers faster than it can recruit them. Inside Russia, the consequences are visible. Reports from the Sverdlovsk region reveal cases of women marrying soldiers days before deployment to claim compensation in case of their death. They have been dubbed Black Widows, symbols of a system that commodifies death. At the same time, veterans returning from the front discover that they are not officially registered as participants in the war, denied benefits and pensions. Their complaints are met with silence or mockery from officials. One such veteran, Konstantin Vladimirov, wounded in 2023, has spent nearly 3 years fighting not on the battlefield, but against bureaucracy, a battle he is losing. His story, like thousands of others, illustrates the decay of the very structure that was meant to glorify and protect them. Meanwhile, Ukrainian morale remains firm. Crowdfunding campaigns for drones, vehicles, and supplies continue daily. Units like the 225th Assault Regiment, known as the Black Swans, record personal appeals to supporters, thanking them for keeping their reconnaissance eyes in the sky. Each contribution, they say, helps us live another day. The larger picture is clear. Russia's propaganda machine is fracturing, its army bleeding, and its diplomacy faltering. The illusion of control, once maintained through fear and censorship, is giving way to a grim realization. The war is no longer winnable. Still, the Kremlin refuses to admit defeat. It insists that all objectives will be achieved, even as the objectives themselves grow smaller, more abstract, more detached from reality. And yet, amid all this chaos, the world waits. Will Moscow accept the peace framework or choose escalation once again? Will Washington's gambit with Belarus yield a breakthrough or merely delay the inevitable? In the final part of this report, we will explore the broader implications of this moment, how this plan could reshape alliances, redefine power, and determine not just the future of Ukraine, but the future of Europe itself. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe. The third part will reveal everything that lies beyond the headlines. The deeper one looks into this unfolding story, the clearer it becomes that the 20-point peace plan is not simply a diplomatic experiment. It is a mirror reflecting the exhaustion, ambitions, and fears of every major player involved. Each side reads it differently. For Ukraine, it is a long-awaited framework for survival. For the United States, a test of global influence. For Europe, a desperate attempt to stop a war that is bleeding its economy. And for Russia, a humiliating reminder that its power is fading faster than it dares to admit. Inside Kyiv, the government has begun preparing for scenarios that only months ago seemed impossible. Advisors close to President Zelensky have confirmed that a special working group has been created to draft the legal and economic instruments necessary to implement the plan, should Moscow accept it. Economists from the Ministry of Finance are already mapping potential routes for the flow of reconstruction capital, while the Security Council works with European officials on the framework for international peace monitors. The tone in the capital has changed. It is no longer purely defensive. The conversation now centers on how Ukraine might rebuild, not only how it must survive. Western leaders have cautiously aligned behind this optimism. In Berlin, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has described the plan as a serious foundation for a realistic peace. Emmanuel Macron, speaking in Paris, echoed that sentiment, though he warned that true peace will come only when justice is achieved. In Brussels, EU High Representative Josep Borrell emphasized that Europe's support for Ukraine will not waver whether the war continues or negotiations begin. Yet in Washington, there is visible tension. The Biden administration, balancing between support for Ukraine and domestic political fatigue, must now coordinate with Donald Trump, whose potential return to power could radically alter the course of negotiations. The inclusion of Trump's name as chair of the future Peace Council has startled observers across both parties, a signal that Washington is already preparing for a political transition. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the mood oscillates between denial and dread. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov continues to insist that Russia will study the proposal carefully, but officials privately acknowledge that the plan is unacceptable in its current form. President Vladimir Putin, surrounded by advisors who feed him only filtered reports, still believes that time is on his side. Yet even his inner circle can no longer hide the truth. Battlefield setbacks, economic strain, and internal discontent are eroding the regime's foundations. Intelligence leaks from within the Russian Ministry of Defense reveal growing anger among mid-level officers over falsified reports and mismanagement of reserves. The once feared Z-blogger community, formerly an arm of the Kremlin's propaganda, now acts as an informal opposition, exposing failures that state television dares not mention. The collapse of Russia's credibility became undeniable when the influential Rebar channel admitted that Kupiansk, long declared under full Russian control, had in fact been lost weeks earlier. The admission triggered a cascade of similar confessions across pro-war channels, forcing the Ministry of Defense into embarrassed silence. The shift was so dramatic that even loyal propagandists like Solovyov and Kotz avoided mentioning Kupiansk for days. For many Russians following these channels, it was a moment of awakening. The myth of inevitable victory shattered in a single weekend. Simultaneously, reports from the southern front lines show that Russian advances have stalled almost everywhere. In Ivanivka, Dnipropetrovsk region, Ukrainian forces have recaptured ground multiple times, turning the area into a gray zone of overlapping trenches and ruined villages. In the east, near Bakhmut and Avdiivka, Russian assaults continue but yield minimal progress. Western intelligence now estimates that Russian monthly losses exceed 30,000, including wounded. The mathematical logic of attrition is catching up with Moscow's war machine. For every brigade rotated in, 2 must be withdrawn for replenishment. This imbalance is slowly but inevitably driving the Russian army toward exhaustion. Yet, despite these grim realities, the Kremlin continues to project confidence. Russian state television fills its broadcasts with footage of weapons parades, factory visits, and patriotic concerts. But beneath the surface, discontent grows. Independent researchers inside Russia report an increase in desertion cases, particularly among mobilized reservists. Many soldiers, returning from the front wounded, discover that their service was never officially recorded. They receive no compensation, no medical benefits, no acknowledgement. Stories like that of Konstantin Vladimirov, who was ordered to prove his own existence to the Ministry of Defense after being declared missing, circulate widely online, fueling quiet rage. This bureaucratic cruelty has become a defining feature of Russia's war. The government celebrates sacrifice but denies responsibility. Local ombudsmen in Sverdlovsk and Tula have confirmed cases of fraudulent marriages, women marrying soldiers shortly before deployment to secure death payments. They are now called Black Widows in regional media, a grim echo of the state's moral decay. Even pro-Kremlin commentators admit that corruption and indifference have turned the so-called special operation into a machine that devours its own citizens. While Moscow bleeds morale, Kyiv leverages every ounce of resilience. Crowdfunding platforms like Monobank and Privat Bank continue to finance drones, vehicles, and medical kits for frontline units. The 225th Separate Assault Regiment, the Black Swans, has become a symbol of this new grassroots warfare. Their videos, recorded from the trenches near Pokrovsk, speak directly to civilians. "Your help keeps us alive." The result is a rare phenomenon. A war fought not only by armies but by an entire society united in survival. Economically, Ukraine remains fragile yet functional. Despite ongoing attacks on power stations and oil depots, the government keeps the grid stable. Engineers and energy workers perform repairs under constant threat. Their perseverance has turned them into national heroes, often celebrated as much as soldiers. The Ministry of Energy reports that, even after 100 consecutive nights of drone attacks, over 90% of the power network continues to operate. The cost, however, is enormous. Western aid packages, once delayed by bureaucratic debates, now arrive faster, though still insufficient to match the scale of destruction. Internationally, the narrative is shifting. Beijing has been pulled into the controversy after Zelensky accused Chinese satellite companies of indirectly aiding Russian strikes. Western intelligence agencies corroborate that Chinese-made imaging satellites have indeed passed over Ukrainian territory before several missile barrages. Whether this was coordinated or coincidental remains unclear, but the accusation has strained China's cautious neutrality. In response, Beijing's foreign ministry issued a brief statement denying any involvement, yet Western diplomats privately confirm that the issue will be raised at upcoming summits. The episode exposes the growing technological dimension of the conflict, where data, imagery, and communication links have become as decisive as tanks and artillery. At the same time, the United States' approach to Belarus is producing unexpected effects. According to the Wall Street Journal, sanctions relief for Belarusian industries has already revived limited trade channels. American officials believe this could act as leverage, a demonstration to Putin that cooperation, not confrontation, brings benefits. Lukashenko, ever opportunistic, uses the moment to rehabilitate his image. Once ostracized, he now entertains visits from Western envoys and even offers advice on how Washington should handle other dictators, from Nicolas Maduro to Xi Jinping. The irony is not lost on anyone. A man long viewed as Moscow's puppet is now being courted as a potential intermediary of peace. Yet for all these diplomatic maneuvers, the reality on the ground remains brutal. Air raid sirens still sound nightly across Ukraine. In Sumy and Kharkiv, families spend Christmas in basements, surrounded by candles and battery-powered radios. In Kyiv, the skyline glows dimly after each attack, not with fireworks, but with fires from damaged substations. The country lives in a rhythm of darkness and resilience. And while the world debates peace terms, the people under bombardment continue to hope for something simpler: a night of silence. The broader implications of this moment stretch far beyond the borders of Ukraine. If this peace plan were ever implemented, it would mark the first time since the end of the Cold War that Russia would be forced to accept legally binding limits on its military reach. It would cement Ukraine's integration into the Western system, formally open its path to the European Union, and effectively dismantle what remained of Moscow's influence over Eastern Europe. For NATO, it would mean a stabilized eastern frontier. For Europe, a chance to rebuild its energy independence and defense capacity. But for Russia, it would mean the collapse of the imperial illusion that has driven its politics for 2 decades. That is why the stakes are so high. Many in Moscow understand that agreeing to the plan could end Putin's rule, but rejecting it might push the country into an even deeper crisis: isolation, economic ruin, and eventual internal fragmentation. The silence from the Kremlin is therefore not confidence, but paralysis. Every option carries risk. Analysts in Washington describe this as the pre-collapse phase of Russian policy, a moment when the system still functions mechanically but has lost its sense of direction. Decisions are made reactively, without coherence. This is why contradictions appear everywhere. Peace negotiations proceed alongside new missile strikes, diplomatic statements contradict military actions, and official narratives crumble within days. The regime continues to move, but blindly. For Ukraine and its allies, this uncertainty is both an opportunity and a danger. If handled wisely, it could lead to a breakthrough, the kind of negotiated settlement that ends wars not through victory, but exhaustion. If mishandled, it could unleash chaos across the region. The next months will therefore determine not just the fate of one war, but the balance of power for an entire generation. As we close this extended report, one truth stands out. The world has entered a decisive phase of this conflict, a phase where diplomacy and destruction coexist, where propaganda collapses under the weight of reality, and where the choices of a few leaders will define the lives of millions. From the streets of Kyiv to the corridors of Washington, from the silence of the Kremlin to the darkened cities of eastern Ukraine, everyone feels that the story is reaching its final act. No one can say whether this act will end in peace or in another surge of violence. But one thing is certain: history is moving faster than anyone expected. Those who still believe the war can be ignored are already part of its consequences. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, every story we tell brings us a step closer to understanding not only the war itself, but the fragile future waiting beyond it.